Okay, welcome to lesson 4 of chapter 2. We are going to be looking at the remainder of 2.3. I'm going to be doing 2 different sections. So the first section, I'm going to talk to you about some genetic material. And then the second bit, I'm going to be talking about the different components, or the different reasons why cells divide. So firstly, I want to draw some attention into your note package. There's this picture there I think is very important. From now on, I'm going to be talking about genetic material. I'm going to be referring to them as chromosomes. And I just want you to understand the relationship between what we call DNA or genes and stuff, and how that relates to chromosomes. So the smallest component, I guess, we can break it down into a gene. And I'm sure that you've seen a picture like this in a movie or a TV show. Whenever they talk about genetic material, this is what they usually show. And each gene is sort of a sequence of letters or molecules that allow for your body to interpret them as a certain trait. So if, for example, you have brown hair and you got that from your parent, how your body was able to get that information is through your genes. So a bunch of different genes together, they coil up, and then you get DNA. Okay, so DNA in itself is very, very small, but it's very, very long. And it can't, so instead of coiling up all together, it's coiled around proteins. So these proteins, their function is to keep this DNA coiled around themselves so that each piece of that information is not damaged. So you've got this entire coil of proteins and DNA all together, and that is what we call a chromosome. Okay, so this particular structure, this X shape, is made up of a bunch of DNA wrapped around protein. Okay, so let's learn a little bit more about genetic material. So every cell contains genetic material. So whether that be, so we learned in our cell theory that all living things are made up of cells. Each of those living cells contains some form of genetic material. Okay, moving on. As I mentioned earlier, all the traits of an organism that exist are found in the genes, right? So these individual sequences, the order in which they're found in, those are the genes, and that's what's responsible for whatever trait that you see in a living organism. All of the genetic material, though, is found in the nucleus, as you remember from what we talked about early on. Okay? To say this one more time, so each chromosome that we see at the bottom here is a long piece of coiled DNA. The long word for it is deoxyribonucleic acid. You don't have to know that, but it would be something, if you're going on in science, you will know that. So a chromosome is DNA and protein coiled together. A few more pieces of information. The number of chromosomes that you find in a living organism is going to differ for each organism. For example, a typical human has 46 chromosomes. Those are 23 pairs of chromosomes, right? So a typical human cell. There are some exceptions for some certain cells in our body that don't have that number, but we'll get to that. That's more complicated. We don't have to know that for now, but an average human cell has 46 chromosomes, 23 pairs of chromosomes. Chromosomes are only visible when the cells are dividing. In fact, that's how we can identify what stage of cell division they're at, because we know that the chromosomes are going to be doing different things during that period of time. So chromosomes, we can only see them through the microscope very clearly through or during cell division. This is very important as well, and I'll recap this when we talk about it in the next chapter. When the cell is ready to divide, the chromatin condenses to form chromosomes. So usually when the cell is not dividing, the chromosomes exist as what we call chromatin. Okay, so they are just thinner strands. And when we get to cell division, it condenses and forms chromosomes. This is the reason why we're able to see it during cell division, is because they become thicker, they become shorter, and they're more dense, so we can see them through a microscope. Okay, so moving on to why cells divide. There's 3 reasons that I have for you. Number 1 is reproduction, right? So if an organism wants to make another organism, or if it wants to reproduce, it will go through one of the two types of reproduction, depending on what type of organism that it is. So number one, the first type of reproduction is asexual reproduction. So in this case, there's 2 points that I want to highlight for you. Number one, in that asexual reproduction, there's only one parent, right? So there's only one parent involved, and the offspring is genetically identical to the parent. So the DNA, or the genetic material, is going to look exactly the same as that one parent. So let's take a look at an example of this.
This is a hydra, a microscopically small animal that lives in freshwater ponds and damp places. The hydra is a simple animal with a tubular body and tentacles that it uses to catch small prey. A hydra does not need a mate to reproduce. It can reproduce by itself. When a single animal reproduces by itself, it is called asexual reproduction. Asexual means without sex. The hydra reproduces by growing a young hydra from its side. The new hydra will separate from its parent and continue to live on its own. It will be an almost exact copy of its parent.
Okay, so 2 things there. One, there is only one parent, and the genetic information of the offspring was exactly identical to that of the parent. Oops. Okay. The second type of reproduction is sexual reproduction. So key differences here. In sexual reproduction, you have 2 parents, and the offspring has genetic information from both the parents. So it's not going to be identical to either parent, because it's going to be a combination of some of the genetic information from one parent and some of the genetic information from another parent, right? So it's never going to be identical to either one of the parents, because there's going to be 2 different sources of that genetic material. Moving on to our second reason why cells divide, it's for growth, right? So if you look at a baby and obviously a grown adult, you'll notice that there's obviously a huge number of cells of difference between those two. What happens when you're growing is that the cells divide, and then you have more and more cells as you're growing into an adult. Third reason why cells divide is for repair. So in order for us to maintain and to live ourselves, we need to make sure that our organisms are repairing. An example of this, if you've ever had a blister, or if you accidentally cut yourself, you will notice that over a few days, that wound is no longer there. How did that gap get filled in? It's because the cells around it are dividing to make up for that. So you've got new cells there because the cells around it are able to divide and repair the wound that you have wherever on your body. Okay, that's pretty much it. I've got 3 questions for you to do for homework, and that's it. Bye.